Hello, welcome to Life Talk for July 24th, 2018. I'm Mark Crutcher, and I'm here with the usual suspects, of course, my assistant Renee and my daughter Sheila.
Hi, everyone.
How are you guys?
Good.
Doing good.
All right, we're going to have a really interesting guest here in a little bit. But first, we've got a couple of stories we want to get to from the court system. U.S. District Judge Carol Bagley Amon, I guess is how she pronounced that, has denied an injunction sought by the New York Attorney General against 13 pro-life people who were trying to pray in front of the sidewalk of an abortion clinic. This was clearly an unconstitutional effort, which the court eventually discovered, against a man named Scott Fritchett, Jr., who was sued by the Attorney General.
Along with other people.
Along with 12 other people total, for wanting to protest in front of an abortion clinic.
The New York Attorney General stated that the reason he was doing it was because that they were intimidating people.
And harassing people. Yep.
They clearly lied.
They were lying through their teeth.
They had video evidence that they lied.
Well, the interesting thing here is the judge claims that they provided this evidence that these guys were intimidating and harassing people, and the judge said the evidence showed that they weren't.
And she said also, Judge Amon said that the witnesses, including for Choice's escorts, you know how they always have the escorts,
right,
to help women, they said that they lacked credibility. The witnesses lacked credibility.
Well, they said they were exaggerating what the pro-lifers were doing.
And that the video evidence that was the so-called video evidence that was provided just didn't show anything.
It said it did not cite a single incident that corroborated the witness's testimony that the pro-lifers were being intimidating or harassing people. And the thing about it is, we have seen this over the years, time and time and time again. And
looks like the First Amendment wins this time.
Well, and in truth, the pro-lifers are the ones that get harassed.
Right.
You see videos, YouTube videos, you see Facebook videos, you even see videos sometimes like on news sites and stuff where it's the pro-lifers that are being harassed, not the other way around.
We had a 67-year-old grandma on the show a few years back who, on video,
was beat.
The pro-aborts came out and beat her up.
That's right.
And then tried to steal the video camera, ran back in the facility, and the police did nothing about it.
Absolutely nothing.
Nothing about it. A 67-year-old grandma
Yes.
was beat up by the pro-aborts.
Yeah.
It's just graceful.
Here in Texas, this is an interesting deal to me. Texas passed a law saying that babies killed in abortions had to be buried.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Well,
The Texas Catholic Conference of Bishops were volunteered to bury them. They volunteered to, bury them in a free Catholic cemetery, a nice burial service, to honor those that were killed.
Yeah.
And people didn't like that.
I know, because supposedly it created an undue burden for the women. But you know what? This is the thing. Is this is such a hard choice to make for these women to go in and have an abortion, abort their child, wouldn't they at least want their child to be buried instead of thrown down at the waste disposal or in the medical
dumpster
waste? I mean, come on.
It just shows that Whole Woman's Health, the abortion chain that was trying to sue, it just shows that they don't care about babies
about anything.
Yeah, and they claim to care about women, and they said that it was undue burden on the constitutionally protected right to abortion. Now, first off, there is no constitutionally right to abortion. There is none.
It was made up.
And then if they truly cared about the women, they wouldn't just say, let us abort your baby. They would do follow-up, and that follow-up would be a grieving process.
Well, it's about money.
It's all about money, and that's what this thing came down to. And the whole women's health argument was that because this would entail some expenses, it created, like you were saying, this undue burden on women and on the abortion clinic to dispose of these babies. The Catholic bishops come along and said, we'll foot the whole bill. We'll come pick up the babies, we'll bury them, you won't be out a nickel. Well, that took away the argument that Whole Women Health had. So then they issued a subpoena they had a third-party subpoena placed on the Catholic bishops that would require them, before they would be able to do this, to turn over literally thousands of internal documents from the Catholic bishops dating back to 1965.
So ridiculous.
And the judges basically said, this is outrageous.
Yeah, because what legal grounds would there be to do that? Absolutely none.
Especially when Roe versus Wade wasn't I mean, it was 73 when abortion was legalized here.
They were just going on a witch hunt, basically.
Basically, they were looking for some excuse to justify this, saying, oh, it's going to be expensive. Catholics say, we'll bear the expense. Won't cost you a nickel. Won't cost the women a nickel. Won't cost you a nickel.
Yeah.
And, oh, well, then we want thousands of documents going back to 1965.
Yeah.
1965.
Crazy.
The interesting thing here, too, is this was on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the opinion on this, it was a 2-1 vote, was written by Judge Edith Jones. And Edith Jones has been mentioned several times as a potential Supreme Court nominee. So that's pretty neat. And also Jim Ho was the other judge that ruled. And I want to read what he said.
Before you do that, I want to make a point that there was still one judge in favor of.
Right.
What was the one judge that was in favor of this ridiculous argument?
I don't know.
A leftist.
But Jim Ho's concurring opinion said, quote, "It is hard to imagine a better example of how far we have strayed from the text and the original understanding of the Constitution than this case," unquote. That's what he said.
So true.
And but anyway, the pro-aborts, of course, have no shame.
Oh, absolutely.
They have no shame. They'll try anything. And it's always, like you were saying, it's always about money.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to take a moment here for RoeBots in a second. And when we come back, we're going to have a really interesting guest, I think. Let's take a moment here for RoeBots.
In 1973, the U.S. Supreme Court legalized abortion nationwide. The decision is called Roe versus Wade, and those who defend it are known as RoeBots. This is how they think.
When a woman is carrying a baby that her doctor says will be handicapped, abortion is the most compassionate thing she can do.
Let me make 5 things crystal clear. First off, people with disabilities have the same right to life as people without disabilities. No one has the right to decide that their lives are not worth living, not even their mothers. Second, doctors are not perfect, and it is not uncommon for women to give birth to healthy babies after being told that their babies had problems. Third, it is an utter disgrace for the abortion lobby to suggest that when they are paid to butcher a handicapped unborn child, they are performing some noble act of compassion. If you think I'm wrong, then take the financial incentive out of it and see how much compassion these people have. Fourth, let's not overlook the fact that the pro-choice gang is not suggesting that society try to provide the disabled with a better life than what they have. They're suggesting that they be killed. Now, you can call that a lot of things, but you certainly can't call it compassion. And fifth, we need to stop fooling ourselves with all this phony talk about abortions of the disabled being done as a service to the disabled. They are done as a service to society. The driving force here is that it's a lot easier and a lot cheaper to kill the disabled than it is to accommodate them. The result of all this is we now have reached the point that when prenatal testing reveals a less than perfect baby, abortion is not just seen as an option, it is considered the default position. In fact, some people are now arguing that given modern technology and the availability of abortion, any woman who gives birth to a handicapped child is considered irresponsible. Now, for those who genuinely believe in this better dead than disabled philosophy, my question is this: why limit our compassion to the unborn? I mean, perhaps the right to choose should be extended beyond the womb. After all, if it is compassionate to euthanize a disabled child who's not even born yet because he or she might live an unpleasant life sometime in the future, then obviously it would be even more compassionate to euthanize a disabled 2-year-old who is living an unpleasant life right now. And by the way, this is a concept that some members of the pro-choice community are already advocating. Welcome back. A few days ago, we got you brought me an email that you'd received from a lady named Patti Smith in California.
Yes.
And she was talking about how she had some experiences with the medical community, psychiatric community, in which they totally refused to recognize abortion as a stressor for PTSD or for any problems that a woman might. It's just women go in and have abortions and they're just happy as a lark and going about their business and no problems, right?
Right.
I want to lay, and we're going to have Patti on with us here in a minute. I want to lay the groundwork for this, though, real quickly. I've told you before, and Sheila, you may remember this. You were pretty young when it happened. We had a case right here in Denton a few years ago where we were contacted by this young girl who had more or less been forced to have an abortion. She was a victim of sexual assault. She was 15 years old. She was in a sexual relationship with a local police officer who was in his 30s. And nothing ever happened to him, by the way, as a result of all this. But anyway, he had taken her for an abortion when she got pregnant. She did not want to do it. She was coerced into it by him, and the abortionist coerced this girl into having this abortion. Immediately, she started having massive psychological problems.
Of course.
Right.
I mean, as well expected, you
Right,
know.
this could be expected.
Yeah.
The upshot of all this was she wound up seeking counseling. She told the counselors that she was missing her baby and that she was having problems as a result of that. The counselor's argument was abortion is not a contributor to post-procedure problems. So, no, you've got problems maybe, but it has nothing to do with your abortion. She kept telling them it did. And they ignored her. This young girl, 15 years old, attempted suicide.
Yeah.
She wound up in a lockdown psychiatric ward in Wichita Falls, Texas, where they refused. The girl has tried to commit suicide, telling everybody she wanted to see her baby. She was upset about the abortion. They're telling her, no, darling, this has nothing to do with abortion.
Yeah.
This is something else.
Unless first counselors, psychologists, and psychiatrists, unless something is written down as a psychiatric disorder, a mental disorder, or, you know, it doesn't exist. It's not a problem. Like they're under post-traumatic stress disorder, there are certain triggers that they have listed down, and you won't find abortion under those triggers. And so it just doesn't exist for them.
It's just no matter what the patient says.
Yeah.
You know, no matter what the patient says, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
You're not suffering anything from that. Anyway, joining us right now from her home in Escondido, California, is Patti Smith. Hello, Patti.
Hi, Patti.
Hi, Patti.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm doing just fine, and you?
Oh, just fine. And of course, you were writing on us a little bit earlier about the fact that it's in the 70s where you are, and it's going to be 110 or something here again today for us. But
Yeah.
but that's okay. We'll take that. Now,
Well,
Patti,
next time you can come and do the show from here.
that's okay.
That's okay.
We
We've been to California.
We like Texas just fine.
Liberal land.
You have, you're involved with Rachel's Hope and with Silent No More. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm the assistant director of Rachel's Hope Healing Ministries, and we do healing programs for women that have had abortions and also women that have had miscarriages and stillbirths as well. And then I am the regional coordinator for the Silent No More Awareness Campaign.
Now, you were telling me that, or you wrote this, when you wrote this email to us, that you are post-aborted. You've had an abortion, or did you have 2 abortions? Is that correct?
Yes, I've had 2 abortions, unfortunately.
And you had psychiatric problems as a result of this, but am I to understand that the psychiatric community treated you just like they treated this old 15-year-old that we dealt with, just totally ignoring your abortion?
Well, they never even brought it up. When I was, I'm also a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober for 20 and a half years now, praise God. But when I had my first abortion, I was already a heavy drinker, but after I had the first abortion, my drinking escalated, and then I had another abortion, and then I just went into a complete tailspin. And when I hit my bottom, I ended up in a psychiatric hospital because I became suicidal. And when I was going through the intake of the hospital, they, went through all my family history and all this stuff, but they never once brought up any trauma such as any pregnancy loss at all, or abortion for that matter. And I had gone into counseling prior to that for depression, and my therapist never brought up anything about abortion either. And I think had they had done that, I might have talked to them about it. I was still kind of hiding the secret of the abortions to begin with. But if a therapist or if a counselor of some sort would have brought it up, and brought it up in a manner of, have you suffered from an abortion or something along those lines, I would have more than likely opened up and been able to talk about it and possibly have gotten healed from it then. But they won't even bring it up.
Well, I mean,
It wasn't even brought up in my rehab.
in any kind of counseling situation, you always have to get to the root of the problem to figure out how to treat whatever it is that's going on. And they're just not getting to the root of their problem because they don't want to recognize that abortion is an issue.
Yeah.
Well, here's what it's important to understand here. When they ignore this with this girl that we had here or with Patti, they're not concerned about the money they make from them. They've already got their money in the bank.
Yeah.
Right.
They don't want the Patti Smiths of the world out here telling other women who have not had abortions yet
Yeah.
that hey, you better think about this real long and hard.
Because this is what abortion does.
This is what it can do to you. So they're not concerned about Patti Smith. They'll write Patti Smith off in a heartbeat to keep Patti Smith from talking to another woman who might be thinking about having an abortion.
Right.
Patti,
Absolutely.
a few years back, we had this young lady that we were working with on another project related to abortion. She came here to the office. She's from Waco, Texas. And she and her husband had a prison ministry going around to various institutions, jails and prisons around Texas. And she did the women's ministry, of course. And she said it was really strange to her. She had never thought about this. But she started bringing up in these prison ministries, she was concerned about the fact, what she was looking at was the fact that the fastest growing prison population in America is women. They're growing exponentially faster than men are. 25, 30, 50 years ago, the prison population was about 16 to 1 or something like that, male to female. Now it's like 3 to 1. So that gap has closed dramatically.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm starting to look at, why is that? What are these women, what's different about women versus men today than women versus men 50 years ago? And one of the things she started asking about was abortion. And she said, I was stunned in the first few segments that I did at these prisons. When I asked how many of these women had abortions that were in the prison, in these ministries that I was in, she said almost every hand went up. And I started talking to these women about that. And she said, and she was not a pro-life activist, nothing like that at that time. She said, I started looking at this and thinking, whoa, if we're sitting here looking at a group of women whose lives are spinning out of control to the point that they're in prison, and 100% of them are saying, I had an abortion, maybe we ought to be looking at that. Now, Patti, I understand that you're involved in prison ministry as well. Is that correct?
Yes, Rachel's Hope has taken retreats into the women's jail here in San Diego. And we've seen a lot of, the women that have come in, the majority of their crimes were basically due to drugs and alcohol, which is obviously directly related, to the trauma and how they're dealing with their trauma from abortion. They're trying to drown it out by alcohol or just hide it through drugs. And then they end up in jail.
Yeah.
And what's sad is I tried to get a prison ministry to go into the regular state prisons. I contacted the state prison board and et cetera, and they wouldn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah, not surprising. And PTSD, it manifests itself in a bunch of drug use. That's why you see like war veterans and stuff with PTSD. So when is the medical community going to fess up and say, oh, abortion does cause PTSD? When is that going to happen?
Well, I mean,
Probably never.
The majority of them are liberals, and it's not going to happen
Yeah.
because they don't want it to happen.
They can't afford for it to happen.
They can't
No.
afford, yeah.
Let me tell you
Right,
something.
with the political, the atmosphere of politics right now, and with the huge lobby of the pro-aborts, there's a lot of pressure for the medical community and for the rehab communities not to bring it up. And another thing that really shed light on this was I spoke at a recovery event in San Diego for San Diego County last year, and I spoke about the correlation between my alcohol abuse and my abortions, and several recovery homes came up to me afterwards and said, we never even considered that. And so I gave them my card. I said, please feel free to contact me. I'd be more than happy to come to your rehab facility and talk to the women and the men and help them with healing. Not one call.
Even though they admitted
Yeah.
that there was a problem and that they had never thought about it.
Right.
I want you to think about this. You mentioned our current political climate. And we're seeing this situation all over the United States where conservatives go on college campuses and like at Berkeley, and the college campus gets set on fire and hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage done, and nobody does anything about it. None of these people wind up going to prison, which is where they should be.
Right.
I want you to imagine, Patti, what would happen in this political climate. If, let's say, a researcher, trained psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever, came out and issued a paper saying, I think we ought to look at abortion as a potential cause of PTSD, and that maybe we ought to consider the possibility that of the 1 million women or so a year that have an abortion in America, every one of them is not perfectly happy with it.
Well, actually,
Wait a minute. What would happen to that person? I think they'd be lucky if their house wasn't burned.
well, no, there actually have been studies done in scientific journals that have been published, and the research just gets brushed aside.
Right, but I'm saying if
Absolutely.
somebody let's say somebody came out with that study and got some notoriety for it, got on the news, got on Fox News, got on MSNBC, and said this, I think there'd be riots in the streets.
Yeah, but like I said, their stuff just gets ignored.
Right.
So,
Well, this is strange for me to say as long as I've been in the pro-life movement for a while now, but I never did connect PTSD with abortion until now. I've heard the symptoms of
Right.
the anniversary dates of when you had the abortion or when the baby is supposed to be born, the fear of infertility, the unable to bond with children, future children or children you already have, and that a child will die. I've heard of all of that, but there are so many more symptoms. There's so many more things that are related to abortion and PTSD.
Yeah.
It's
Well, you and I had a conversation, you remember, not long ago, and I've had this conversation with a bunch of them, but we were in on one of them. A woman that had her abortion, 40 years ago?
yeah,
And said she had never been able to bond with her two sons.
yes,
well,
She had no relationship with her two sons.
Yeah.
Because of a prior abortion.
Yeah.
She could not bond with those future children.
Well, I think it had been 60 years, 63 years because because her kids are my age.
Right.
well, now the
Well, it
big
was 30 years for me.
yeah.
And I had been sober for a long time, and even though I had gotten sober and I felt really good in my sobriety, there was still something that was bothering me, and I couldn't get around it at all. And it was like this dark cloud that was hovering over me, and I almost relapsed several times. And it wasn't until I heard about what they call post-abortion syndrome, or PTSD actually, and someone was speaking about it, that I realized that's where it was. And I went into healing, and lo and behold.
Well, there's a big movement right now called the Child Free Movement. It's a big movement online, among younger women. And Renee, you had mentioned that one of the symptoms was fearful of pregnancy or fearful of, having children. Well, you wonder how many people of that Child Free movement have had abortions, and that's why they're so big into it.
Right.
They've probably had abortions. They're afraid of having children, and so they're now part of the child-free
Is
movement.
this a feminist? movement?
No,
I had a tubal ligation at the age of 30 after my 2 abortions, and I came to understand that I was punishing myself for the abortions. I gave up my fertility because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and back when we were doing a lot of malpractice cases against the abortion industry, before state legislators started putting in these tort reform pieces of legislation, and basically made it impossible to sue abortionists. But at one time, we were highly involved in that, and we were involved in about 2,000 cases. But one of the things we would always ask about when we would have a new client was this situation about emotional trauma. And a lot of times women didn't realize it. But we would start asking questions about abusive behavior, self-abusive behavior. And they say, no, I've never abused myself. But then you start talking to them. And like we had one woman, I remember vividly talking to her, she had had 4 one-car wrecks in less than a year after her abortion. And she had never had a wreck in her life up till then. But the year after her abortion, she had 4 one-car wrecks. She hit parked cars, she hit a brick wall at one point. She didn't realize that this was self-destructive behavior. And we saw these women starting to take drugs. We started a ton of them. The most common thing we saw was promiscuity. Women become very promiscuous a lot of times after abortions. They start doing drugs, they start doing alcohol. We had a woman one time that was in her 30s, had her abortion, started smoking. Now, how many people have you ever known in your life that started smoking in their 30s?
Not unless something
many.
tragic happened to them, or they're stressed
Absolutely.
out about something.
Or it's self-destructive behavior. So
Now, Patti, how many have you ever come across when talking to these women that said, if only someone told me that, not only the abortion can hurt me physically, but emotionally, I wouldn't have had an abortion?
I can't count the times that I've heard that. And it's sad, and I know I would have probably not had mine either. But we've been sold a bill of goods. That it was just tissue, there's not going to be any after effects, it's gone and forgotten. And I'm sorry, but that rhetoric just does not fly.
right, it's a lie.
And you hear the testimonies on the Silent No More website, and it's obvious, and there's thousands of testimonies on that website of women, and the majority of them did have issues with drug and alcohol abuse, promiscuity, fertility issues, you name it, they suffered from it. And what is the common denominator? Abortion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Well, Patti, thank you for contacting us, and thank you for being on the show today. And I just ask you to continue to try to help these women recover, because no one can help them more than somebody who's been through it like you have. Because you can speak their language.
Absolutely, and I'm really thrilled to be on the air with you guys today, and for you contacting me, and God bless you for your ministry.
Well, thank you, Patti.
Thank you, Patti.
Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, hon. Bye-bye.
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 So think about all the thousands of women who wouldn't have had abortions if the medical community, if the individual counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, and even doctors would have stepped forward and said, hey, there are consequences to abortion, even your mental health. Think of all those babies that would have been saved if the medical community had just stepped
If
up.
they were just honest.
That's right.
One of the things, and we're totally out of time here, but one of the things I've always brought up too when people talk about regret over abortions and so forth, or trying to deny that it exists, I'll say, I tell you what, let's do. You go out, let's say you're a pro board, you go out and you scour the countryside and you find women who had an unplanned pregnancy and gave birth to their baby, who now say they wish they'd had an abortion, right?
Right.
You go find all those women you can. You bring them out into the public. For every one of those you can find, I'll find 1,000 women who had abortions who say they now wish they hadn't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So tell me which one is the most, which is the most risky thing to do?
Well, and if you find one of those that said that they wish they had aborted their child, they were being paid by somebody.
Well, not, or they're mentally unstable.
That's right.
There's some. Have you ever met a woman in your life
No.
who said, hey, when I got pregnant, I thought about abortion, but I didn't. I had my baby. I wish now I'd have gone ahead and
Yeah.
had him killed or.
I mean, every
her.
once in a while we'll read something, but they're just going to court and trying to get money. That's all.
Well, those are usually ones whose baby had some handicap
Yeah, that's true.
that the doctor didn't tell
right,
them,
yeah.
and they come out here and they say, "Oh, if you'd have told me that, I'd avoid this baby. So give me $20 million."
Yeah.
That's what's
Yeah,
going on.
that's
there.
right. That's true.
Anyway, we're out of time. You got.
Yeah, Richard Fisher says, Lord, wake up our country to the truth. And Yeshia's name, I'm sorry I said that wrong. And then you have some highs from Mary and Lynn Mills and Beverly. She says, howdy, Mark and team.
Hi.
Howdy, Beverly.
Howdy.
Howdy. I wonder if the girl's from Texas or not. She thinks everybody in Texas says that. So.
I say y'all, but not howdy.
You don't say howdy.
No,
I never heard you say howdy.
no.
Right.
I don't greet people howdy, but I do say y'all.
And I've heard you say just about everything there is to say. But I don't think I've heard you say howdy. Even you, I don't hear howdy.
No, I don't say
And you live out in the sticks.
Yeah, right.
You're not even an urban Texan. You're a suburban.
Yeah, I'm a y'all person, I guess.
You're out in the middle of nowhere. You and your 10 or 12 or 15 cats, or ever how many it is now. They just the cat farm continues to grow out there. I'm telling you. I'm
so
telling you,
embarrassing.
Renee. You're going to be one of those people.
Yeah.
I'll be long gone, of course, by then. But you're going to drop dead one day, 86, 90 years old, and they're going to go to your house and find 175 cats.
Lord, I hope not.
Hey, all lives matter, but I wouldn't have that many cats, but all lives matter.
Yep. Well, we got 3 dogs up here every day and a cat, and then you've got a whole herd of them at home, and then we got a cat at home that doesn't come up here because she's mean. But anyway,
We have all the animals we can.
we got all the
handle-
animals we can
handle.
say grace over.
Yeah.
And we just got a new one. We introduced him a couple of weeks ago. Little
Tux,
Tux, little
yes.
Tux the dog. So anyway, that's it. We're out of time. Until next time, remember, Life Dynamics is not here to put up a good fight. We're here to win, because winning is how the killing stops. We'll see you next Tuesday.